Hi Emily, how are you?
Yeah, I'm great, thanks. How are you?
Yeah, really well, thank you. Thank you for joining me on the show today. A little bit about you first, being an English teacher,
Mhm.
originally from Dublin, now in Derby. You've got a master's, you're a PhD candidate as well as an English teacher, and officially certified ADHD coach. A very busy woman.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's the kind of suits our brains in lots of ways. I feel like if I'd have told myself that like 2 years ago, I'd be doing all those things, I'd be like, that's crazy, but it really works for me.
You've got a lot of variety in what you do, obviously with the coaching, with teaching, but still with some similarities as well, I guess.
Yeah, there's a lot of there's definitely between teaching and coaching, I would say there's a lot of overlap in terms of like the social skills element of it. So it's nice to be able to use the skills that I've built in teaching in like a different way and in a different format. And then I think the PhD stuff is a totally different, totally separate again, but I think that's what keeps me stimulated. I'm interested in what I'm doing, so that's really nice.
Experiencing both sides of the coin with education as well. What's the experience like from being a teacher to a student, and the support with learning someone that is neurodiverse? Is there quite a disparity between the two?
I definitely think since because I was late diagnosed, so I had actually been teaching for 5 or 6 years before I got my diagnosis. And I think definitely since I got my diagnosis, obviously my understanding of it is completely different to what it was when I did my teacher training. I think my ability to support is obviously considerably better. And I think particularly around like ADHD girls because it looks totally different. Like it can be those girls who are like complete perfectionists and their grades are really good. So I think being able to spot that and support that, I think that's really enhanced considerably since my diagnosis. And then I think I'm also very much aware of I suppose just like the chaos of teaching's there's a lot of running around. It's quite frantic. Every day is different, obviously. That suits my ADHD, but then also there's definitely bouts where I'm kind of on the edge of burnout coming up to a half term. So just putting supports in for myself of like, oh, we're just gonna have a chill lesson today. So yeah, it's a double whammy of hyper vigilant of it.
And it's really interesting that you say about the half term because working in education is slightly different to a 9 to 5 job where I generally, I think, have a week off like every sort of 3 months. And it's like towards the end of those 3 months, I'm starting to feel that burnout feeling.
Yeah.
But with you, with the terms, they're a little bit longer, but then again, the holidays are a little bit longer as well. Does it make quite difficult to have to like work around that? Because there's not obviously any flexibility in that because you've got to work to the school times.
So I think one of the big things, because I know there's always those arguments of like teachers have loads of holidays, but I think compared to other jobs I've worked in, it is quite energy demanding in terms of like you're up there essentially performing for 8 hours a day. And then also you're carrying the weight of whatever kind of issues kids disclose to you. Like there's quite a lot of like emotional aspects to it as well that you're carrying. And then obviously there's a lot of work that you're bringing home. Like I don't finish at 4 o'clock and then that's it. There's a lot of extra hours and extra labor that goes into it. But I think in terms of from HD perspective, I can't really be tired or I can't really have burnout during the term, if that makes sense. Because that effort of like taking sick time, whilst obviously you can, it's just you're playing catch up then when you come back. So yeah, you kind of I find my body clock is just kind of because I'm doing it so long now, definitely on the run into like, particularly October half term because if it's the longest stretch. I'm really tired by the time I get to half term, and I just find my executive function slipping a little bit on the last week coming up to half term.
That's well, I'm glad it's just a slipping up to it and not every day. Being an ADHD coach, I understand how to manage it a little bit better, I guess.
Yeah, so it's all the advice I'd give to clients, and because of ADHD doesn't mean I get like I don't get it perfect all the time, but definitely things like having good routines, having exercise, what I'm eating, like all that sort of stuff. That's definitely extra time consuming, but if I don't do it, I would notice the difference just on like a day-to-day basis. Yeah.
Yeah. And with working in school now, and just to take you back to when you was at school, how
Mm.
different is the support and awareness now in schools around neurodiversity than back when you was in school?
Yeah, so I think it's different again in the Irish context to maybe the UK context in terms of Ireland's possibly a little bit behind in terms of like the numbers of people who are getting diagnosed and stuff like that. And yeah, I feel the awareness is kind of a couple years behind, but it's definitely getting there. I guess when I was to look at when I went to school, I would have gone to private, very academic school, and the idea of anyone having anything different was kind of almost like a big deal. I think there was like two girls in my entire year group that were dyslexic, and it was like it was a big deal. Whereas then when I stepped into the classroom and I was teaching, you'd have like 10 kids in front of you with some sort of neurodiversity. So I definitely think we're like moving in the right direction. It's also really having an in-depth understanding of that. So although you've got kids with a diagnosis in front of you, the level of training I think still hasn't caught up with the numbers, if that makes sense. So I think like say the training I would have got when I did my master's kind of like 10 years ago, it was just touching the surface for the needs of
Right.
those kids. Like I've learned so much more since I've gotten a diagnosis. And I suppose if you're not in my position, you'd still be operating off what you know when you did your teacher training.
Just touching back on your diagnosis as well. I mean, in the UK, there's a lot of people that are struggling to get diagnosed, and a lot of people that we have on this show are late diagnosed as well. But you've had quite a unique experiences with your diagnosis, haven't you?
Yeah, so I got diagnosed in Ireland, and in Ireland, the healthcare system is very different to the UK. So although we do have a public healthcare system, it's kind of, I suppose, it's really not fit for purpose. So people don't rely on it, so to speak. But to get an ADHD diagnosis, I think if my understanding is correct, at the time anyway, I couldn't get an adult ADHD diagnosis through the public sector. So I had to go private in Ireland. So I did get a diagnosis in Ireland privately. And then literally the next day I actually moved to the UK. But I knew that's what was happening anyway. But obviously then that introduced issues around like medication and things like that. So then when I did go to my GP in the UK, I would have to be re-diagnosed, essentially, was what they said. They wouldn't accept the diagnosis from Ireland, even though I had like the psychiatrist's notes and like I had everything ready. I suppose I was surprised at, because I kind of was like, oh well, I have it. Like I didn't think I'd
Yeah,
have to go through the ringer again, because anyone who's going through the process, it's really quite difficult in terms of like the paperwork and just the time and sitting in that window of waiting to know. Like
yeah,
as in Ireland,
yeah,
I was really lucky that it was only, I think it was only maybe 6 months or something. Like it wasn't too bad, but it was sitting in that like not knowing period for that length of time. I can't imagine how people do that for years. But obviously in the UK, after I moved, if I want to get access to medication, which we spoke about this before, currently I'm unmedicated, but it's just if that changes, I kind of have to preempt that and foresee that.
yeah,
Because the wait list I was advised was going to be, I think 7 to 8 years was what they had said in my like area. Which is heartbreaking, because you kind of think I've got the diagnosis, I've done the hard bit, I can
mm.
get the, but no, it's like I'm back to kind of square one, which is really, yeah, it's just really upsetting and frustrating.
Yeah. I can imagine. I've had my own experiences with just getting diagnosed in one country alone, let alone obviously you getting the diagnosis, then for it to not be recognised. I don't think, as far as I'm aware, I don't think there's any other condition like it where it's not a diagnosis from. I think even within the UK, sort of a private diagnosis, you still have to get forced to go through the system again for a further diagnosis, just because
Yeah.
it's within the NHS. You said about the 6 month waiting time? That was in Ireland. So you didn't go through the NHS waiting process at the moment?
No, I haven't bitten the bullet on that yet, because I just don't feel well, I'm kind of happy with my medication choices at the minute. Like I'm happy with that for the minute, but it's just that effort of committing to that wait list. And then there's the concern
Mm,
of like, oh, what if we move in those 8 years? Or because all those things can happen in that
yeah.
kind of time span. So for the minute, no, I haven't made a commitment to the NHS wait list just yet.
No, and I don't blame you, to be fair, with the waiting times as they are. You're not medicated, so there's not that need. And if you can manage without the medication, which I think, there's a real mixed bag of people I speak to that medicate but still have to manage symptoms, some
Mm.
side of traits and stuff on their own anyway. So if there's not like a really urgent need, then yeah, I'd save the wait. But yeah, you obviously said about how being diagnosed and getting that diagnosis helped you understand ADHD a lot more.
Hmm.
What was it about ADHD that you learned following your diagnosis?
I think definitely when I did my teacher training and when I was teaching, it was very much that stereotypical thing of kind of the kids that were like bouncing off the wall and maybe like couldn't get started. It was the layers of like the executive functioning and like emotional kind of aspects of it that to me I was like, oh wow, like that's something I never had considered in terms of like say my student demographic that I would teach. And now, particularly as I said, if I was to look at like young girls with a diagnosis or maybe who didn't have a diagnosis, to me, I'm like, oh, well, that makes sense now. Like their behavior makes sense. The fact that they might be a bit erratic or whatever. I definitely think just the layers to it. Like I think when I was doing my teacher training, it was very much a surface level, introduce movement and like all those kind of tick boxy things.
In terms of obviously following that, you've now become an ADHD coach as well. Did it affect your kind of vision for the future as well, and direction for your career at all?
Yeah, 100%. Like I definitely think I had to really look at kind of now it was a very transient point in my life in terms of like I was moving country, I was starting a PhD, like I was, there was a lot of big changes for me at the
Mm.
time, but there was definitely a big reflection on kind of well what I want my life to look like, but also what I needed to look like to essentially work for me and work for my brain. And I think say the dynamic that I have now where I've got a lot of spinning plates, but I've also got control over my own time, like that really works for my brain. So like the ideal would be to have a scenario where I kind of have something like that. But then I think obviously my personal experience as kind of like a late diagnosed woman in particular, and just kind of the female experience of the healthcare system kind of globally of kind of maybe not being believed and not being trusted. That's definitely what led me to going on to be an ADHD coach because I think I organically became that friend that people would come to and ask and yeah, it just felt like a very natural thing to go and do.
Yeah, with obviously saying about the being a woman with ADHD, what
Mm.
are the differences between men and women with ADHD, or boys and girls as well? Obviously, because you'll see both kind of age groups or stages in life, I guess, with ADHD. What are the clear differences between the two?
So I suppose from like a really really young age, girls are kind of socialized or conditioned to mask essentially like that effort of like a kid bouncing off the wall. There's kind of like it's acceptable for a boy to do that, and for a girl it's like okay, sit down now. So from a really really young age, girls are taught to essentially mask, and that then becomes a coping strategy. So I think a lot of the struggles are kind of quite internal and it's much harder to spot, which is obviously why women, the average age is like 35 for them to get a diagnosis. Like it's a lot later. But I think in terms of what we do see and kind of what to look out for can be what would seem the polar opposite of like almost perfectionist tendencies of the girls who work extremely hard and put in all the extra time and do quite well academically. Like I think that was me looking back on it in school. Like I definitely would have worked quite hard and done quite well, but it was all the extra work that I didn't appreciate I was doing that nobody else was putting in all that extra time. So it's those kind of things like if it's taken someone longer to do things than it should, that would be kind of indicative of it.
Is there any recommendations that say if somebody's listened to this and they think their child may have ADHD, would you recommend they seek a diagnosis and
100% get your child a diagnosis, and then I think what you do after with that diagnosis is entirely up to you. But I think for me, going through kind of I suppose my entire like adolescence and entire educational career with no supports was it was just so difficult, and I think you internalize so much of that of like oh I can't do this, or you kind of put it all entirely on you as opposed to it being a result of your executive functioning. So I think I would never kind of wish that on a kid to go through that feeling of like feeling inadequate or feeling like they can't do things. Whereas if you have that diagnosis, okay, well, it's because of this that I'm doing it. Whereas I definitely would have felt like, oh, why can't I do those things that like everybody else can do? And why am I so chaotic? And yeah, I definitely would recommend get a diagnosis just so that that child feels kind of seen and validated. And then in terms of you can get access to supports and education that I obviously didn't get.
yeah, which is I know it makes such a huge difference as well when you don't get that support. Makes it far more difficult even to do what might seem basic to other people, but like you said, doing that extra work just to match or keep on top of what other people are doing. I'm just curious to know, with still a little bit of a stigma around ADHD in terms of the kid bouncing off the wall, and is necessarily some people still perceive it as like a bad condition, that means the kid's going to get kicked out of school, be a bit more naughty or things like that. Obviously, it doesn't always show up like that. Is there any sort of difficulties if you have conversations with parents about, if their child potentially has ADHD, are they kind of concerned and worried about that?
Yeah, I think definitely parents are, it's like it's on their radar and they're kind of very aware that their child has different needs. But in terms of it's interesting because I suppose during my entire teaching career, obviously I've encountered plenty of parents of children with ADHD, and it's very interesting to observe like the differences in terms of their outlook for the future of their child. Parents would be very much like nurturing and encouraging their child to kind of pursue whatever, whereas other parents would almost have very limited beliefs of their child's kind of abilities. Like they would think, oh well, like getting dressed in the morning is hard for them, so they're not going to university, like that sort of thing. And
Yeah.
that's quite upsetting to have those conversations and to engage with that. But yeah, there's quite a big difference in terms of there's one that kind of almost adhere to the stigma of a child not doing well academically, and then there's some that would kind of push their children academically. I'm thinking of like one student in particular who I had for Leaving Cert English, and he was just absolutely fantastic. And I remember his parents being like, "Oh, we're just a bit concerned," and I was like, "He's absolutely flying it. Like he's going to be fine. He's top of the class." So it's interesting to see the kind of difference. And I think if his parents hadn't have been supporting and encouraging him, I don't think he would have gone the way he did. Like he went on to
Yeah.
university. But I think when you've got the parents with the limited beliefs, like that child doesn't stand a chance then of doing anything like that.
Really interesting that you say that, because I think sometimes with people, there's a perception that if you do have ADHD, like, it's limiting to what you can do, but that's
Yeah.
really not the case. You're living proof with having a master's, working towards a PhD and things like that. So definitely with the right support, you can still achieve anything that you want to. It just may be that they have to be encouraged to follow what they're really interested in, because otherwise they're not going to necessarily perform. Maybe with a child with parents that have got those limited beliefs, might try and push them down a route that they're not just don't find enjoyable, and then they're just not going to seem as successful, but just because they're not interested, but it doesn't mean they're not capable.
But I definitely think that stigma of kind of education and ADHD is there. Like, it's funny, I was having this conversation with a friend of mine at the weekend, and definitely kind of that idea of people can't do well in education if they've got ADHD. And I think that's very prevalent. And even when I got my diagnosis, I was like, am I being ridiculous now starting a PhD? Like I'd kind of almost disregarded all of the educational achievements that I'd had up to that point, because I think that's how strong that kind of stigma is in
Yeah.
society. So yeah, I can kind of understand why parents fall into that, because you have to kind of fight hard to resist that stigma.
Yeah, yeah, because there's definitely a lot of sort of negative connotations when you think of ADHD. Because when I was back at school, it was that kid that was bouncing off the wall that would not sit still in class and probably end up getting kicked out because, I don't know, throwing a paper airplane at somebody up, or because they're just not concentrating. But then it just manifests in different ways, and it doesn't necessarily mean that's what's going to happen by any means. To try and educate people more on stigma. Obviously, you're educating children, but in terms of educating parents about neurodiversity in their children and what
Mm,
they that might look like for them, do you
mm.
think that like the school systems could do more in terms of educating parents about if their child is potentially neurodivergent, but they don't understand what that really means?
Yeah, I think obviously being on the other side, like schools are stretched, like they're stretched quite thin. One thing that's been really interesting, so in the Irish context, obviously teachers have to do a certain amount of like continued professional development, and that's all done externally. So it's done in education centres, whereas in the UK it's all done in the school. But one thing that came about quite a bit from that training was, so I delivered a load of training this year with those centres just around ADHD and obviously kind of like how to manage it in the classroom. But what actually came about from a lot of it was parents who were like, I'm a teacher and I'm coming to like learn about this, but this sounds like my child. So it's been really interesting that they've kind of learned from attending things like that, and they're like completely free to attend, like anyone can go to them. So having those kind of spaces, I think, are positive. And I also think having a space that's almost like out of the school setting can be quite a positive thing. Because if you've got a child who doesn't have a positive relationship with education, people have got to guard up about education. They may not be as quite as receptive to that information and that message if it's coming from a school.
We talk about things like diagnosis and medication and things like that. Some of those stuff aren't necessarily accessible because of the wait time. So the fact that there's free courses that people can attend to help educate themselves, whereas with parents who aren't aware necessarily might not have that support, may have those limited beliefs. So having something accessible it seems really important. It sounds like something that we should, push a lot more of.
Yeah. And I think also for parents to have, like I hosted a workshop a while ago just for parents to come and attend and like learn a little bit more. But what was really interesting and what I learned about it was just parents needing that space to kind of say, oh, well, I'm glad I'm not alone in this, and I'm glad I'm not the only one who's finding it hard, and kind of sharing almost tips and tricks with each other. And I just feel like that's what we need really. And I consciously hosted that for free because I know parents are like desperate to get help. But it's just, I think also having that space for parents to like connect in with each other and just kind of share stories and share experiences as opposed to all the negatives of like, oh, well, they're not doing well in school. So yeah, I agree. And I think having it free is of the utmost important just to make that support accessible to people.
Yeah, because you don't really get that support even through going through the NHS and the diagnosis. It is obviously all through the medical lens, and once you've got that diagnosis, it's not like, okay, you're diagnosed, here's what's next, like here's how you can understand it more or support your child. As far as I'm aware, anyway.
You're kind of left to your own when you get the diagnosis, that the medical profession is very much like off you go. And, and I would agree in terms of it is only looking at it from a medical lens, and it is so much more than that. Like as
Mm.
we both kind of know, it's like lifestyle choices and all the rest. Like I don't think just putting a child or an adult or whoever just on medication is sufficient. Like it has to be kind of, you have to look at all aspects of that person's life. And I don't think that they do that in the treatment currently.
No, because I think it's treated, in my opinion, at the moment, it's looked at almost like physical condition in terms of they'll look to diagnose, then they'll look to medicate, but that's not
Mm,
necessarily the answer. Whereas things, maybe sort of depression, people may be encouraged to seek therapy and things like that to help them over a prolonged period of time. And I think it needs to be the same with ADHD, and because medication just it isn't the cure and it's not the whole solution as well, as many people
mm.
say on this show about still having to learn how to manage traits. It
Yeah,
can be.
like that's a big part of what I suppose is about, is kind of teaching those strategies and those principles. And it would be great if that was kind of more, like people could access it through the NHS, or like that it was kind
Mm.
of encouraged a little bit more. But it seems like it's almost only known to people who are in those bubbles. Like, as in, I don't think someone who's diagnosed a child would be like, oh, have a look at coaching. But you would imagine that that would be something that's recommended. Like, when I got my diagnosis, it was very much like, right, that three-prong approach of medication, therapy, and coaching, like that would be the recommended treatment. But from a lot of people I've heard,
But that's
that's
not
not
what
their
happens, is it?
experience.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And I think because it's the whole thing with coaching is teaching those skills and that kind of coping strategy, and it's designed to be a bit like therapy, where it is that kind of like, I suppose, lifelong support. You can kind of dip in and out when you need it, because I think that's what we ultimately need is time, because it's going to ebb and flow with the ADHD. There's going to be times where it's fine, and there's going to be other times where we just need that support.
Especially when you consider like 3 to 5% of the population is estimated to have ADHD as well. It's not like a small scale thing
No.
with ADHD. And, if somebody doesn't get the right support, it can end up obviously affecting their mental health and then,
Yeah.
spiraling from there, really. In terms of what you do as an ADHD coach, what is it that you bring? Obviously, you talked about the workshops that
Yeah.
you put on. If somebody's wanting to find out about those workshops, firstly, where can they find out about those?
I try and put it on like LinkedIn as well, but Instagram is probably the best place to find me. I just find that like the easiest way to get a hold of me. And also on my website, usually I'll put it up, but Instagram's definitely the best place to find it. And it's just at Busy Brains Coaching. Part of the vision around what I'm doing with the coaching, and I'm kind of in a very fortunate position in that I'm teaching as well. So it's not my like sole income. Because of that, I'm able to host things for free because I think part of my vision is I want it to be accessible to people. Because I think even when people do get a diagnosis or they've gotten access to work, like it's like an 8 or 9 month wait to get access to work. So I'm like, right, what can we do in the interim? Like, what can I do to support people in the meantime, just to help them in that kind of wait period? But yeah, that would be quite important to me to kind of have things available for free every kind a couple of months.
Certainly recommend anyone that's listened to check those out. And is it around the Derbyshire area that you that hold them?
So I hold most of them online because that
Oh,
makes
okay.
it more
Yeah.
accessible so that it's not in person, it's not like everybody can attend them. Because again, this was another consideration of like, right, where do I do them? What's the easiest way for people to get to them? And then my last one that I did was for late diagnosed women, but I also had it recorded so if they couldn't attend the live, that they could catch up on it at their own time. Because again, it's just trying to make it more accessible.
What is it that you can bring as well as outside the workshops as an ADHD coach? What are the benefits to working with an ADHD coach?
Yeah, I think because I obviously would attend an ADHD coach myself. It varies depending on where you're at in your ADHD journey, if that makes sense. So when I first got diagnosed, I was attending a coach almost every week. And now I would be kind of like, oh, once a month is fine because I've kind of built those strategies and I possibly don't need as much support. But there's times where during the academic year is busier than others and I would need slightly more support. But it's a lot around kind of keeping you on track, but also seeing solutions that you might not see yourself. So you know yourself if you're having a problem when you work and you're like, I don't know who to speak to about this. Sometimes just having that outside perspective on it can be really useful. And it's different speaking to a colleague because obviously they understand how our brain works and how the kind of spiraling that goes with. So I think that's a great way it can support is that it's someone outside your brain who understands your brain kind of offering you solutions or ways of kind of approaching things. But what I would say is it's designed as like a collaborative thing. So I'm never going to tell a client, right, you should do this. It's kind of like they have to come up with the solution themselves because obviously part of our brain is if we're told to do things, we won't. So it's that kind of collaborative approach, collaborative support.
Yeah, that's brilliant. I'm glad you said you're not going to tell me what to do either because I'm out. But
I
no,
know.
it's and that's what you need, isn't it? When especially with ADHD, you know, I've talked about sort of on the show already body doubling and things like that,
Yeah.
and working with ADHD coach, I suppose it is the same in that essence because you've got somebody to kind of work things through. And as you said, it's not about you telling them what to do, but almost prompting, I guess, and just
Yeah.
giving them a bit of sense of direction.
It's the accountability that's great. So I know myself when I get like out of a routine and I know I need to get back into one, it's like, oh, okay, well, I've got a call with my coach in a week or 2 weeks. Like they're gonna ask me how my morning routine is going. It's like that body doubling idea of like there's a pressure there to do it. And if that pressure works for us essentially, because then I will get my morning routine nailed down and I'll commit to it. Whereas I think it's like everything, we know what we should be doing, but we don't always necessarily do it.
What I'm curious to know actually is because I've not discussed this with anyone, what
Mhm.
is the process like to become a certified ADHD coach?
Yeah, so it's different depending where you go. So I suppose this is possibly why it's not being recommended on the NHS is because it is kind of unregulated and it is, which is obviously for lots of reasons like very problematic, but there's no definitive course to go and do. Now there is ADCA, which is like the kind of the original, which is in America. But again, it's a certificate and it's a diploma. It's not necessarily like a degree or whatever. So I
Right.
think until we're at a point where it's kind of a regulated sector, I can understand why it's not
Recommended.
being
Yeah.
recommended yet. So I suppose in terms of what it looks like, it's different depending on what course you go to do. So there's some courses that are like a couple of weeks, there's some that are a year. The prices obviously vary accordingly. And in terms of then from the time constraint, that also determines, right, are you getting practice sessions with clients? Are you getting observed doing your coaching? So it does very much vary quite considerably. It's quite difficult. The unregulated thing is problematic in the sense of for people who are looking for a coach to like be aware of that. So I know that's one thing I'd always say to parents is like, please make sure your coach is like police checked. Financially would be the main kind of limitation. Like they are, you know, most of them I think are a couple of thousand to do it. And again, that varies depending on how long the course is as well. So I know the one in America was, I think when I looked into it, I think it could have been like 12,000, which is quite expensive considering it's not like a university qualification. So obviously it's a big financial commitment, but then you're kind of running your own business.
Yeah, and is it just in the UK that it's not regulated, or like is it regulated in the US with that
No,
course? No,
it's not
just not
regulated
at all.
anywhere, no.
Yeah.
The one in the US is considered to be the original or the first one, but it's not. Now I know they've got like associations and memberships that you can join afterwards, but again, that association is run by the same crowd that run the course, so it's kind of a bit, there's a conflict of interest there for sure.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
And with the course that you did, what was your experience like that? I believe was it Leanne Maskell that supported
Yeah,
you with yours and
yeah, so I did mine with ADHD Works. And I suppose obviously Leanne is like really well known, particularly in the UK context around ADHD, and I think she's doing a lot of really, really amazing work. The course was great. It was, but again, it was quite intense. Like it was quite
Mm.
a kind of intensive short course. But again, I think because I had done the teacher training, so I understood that kind of dual thing of learning whilst practicing.
How did you find spinning all those plates? We talked briefly on it earlier, but obviously being a teacher and PhD candidate, ADHD coach, a lot to juggle. And so hats off to you, first of all. But anyone who is spinning a lot of plates, is there any
Yeah.
advice that you would give them just to avoid that burning out?
I learned the hard way to do it because originally when I moved over and was doing teaching and my PhD, I was working full time in a secondary school, and the education systems are very different, but I was kind of naive to that when I moved over. So I actually ended up having a really quite a serious and quite severe burnout. And I kind of had to be like, right, I can't do all this at once and I need a bit of space in my week or whatever. So then I moved into further education and I reduced my work hours, which then gave me the space to like compartmentalize my days. So I've got my like Tuesday and Wednesday are the days that I'm teaching, and then Monday, Thursday, and Friday are the days that I'm doing my PhD stuff. But I do some coaching in the evenings because evenings is a good time for people, and then I do a couple of hours coaching on the weekend. But it allows me to kind of compartmentalize my time, whereas I think originally I wasn't spinning the plates very well, and it was definitely quite chaotic. But I sit back and think, right, is this working for me? And what can I take off? It's funny because I've obviously taken on the coaching. Originally, it was just PhD in teaching. So I've taken something extra on, but I'm doing it in a different way. If I was teaching full time, I don't think I'd be able to do all of this. But I'm
Yeah.
obviously in a very fortunate position financially. I'm able to do that. And I appreciate that that's not everybody's circumstances. But what I would say is if you are looking to do something like coaching training, can you commit to that time frame? It is going to be a couple of weeks or a couple of months or a year of something quite intense. Can you commit to that? So don't let the routines and the exercise and all those good things fall by the wayside for those couple of weeks. Like you have to be able to stick to those as well.
Yeah, and I think that's really important. I am guilty of it, working full time, doing the
Mm,
podcast, not realizing exactly what you're walking into. And I've found
yeah.
in the 3 months that I've been doing it, I've certainly found the hard way of having to be a bit more strategic about it and planning, which obviously is not necessarily the strongest suit of an ADHD brain, being able to organize efficiently and consistently. So yeah, it's definitely key to make sure that you can commit the time and in the right way as well.
Yeah, but
Not
then it's also just an observation I would have is just because it's something you're passionate about and you're interested in, those skills that you're like, oh, I'm not, planning an organization are obviously a challenge. It's like you're kind of making that work because you're passionate about it. So I think anyone who is looking to add another plate to spin, we will kind of persevere and we will get it done, but it's just also minding yourself in that kind of period as well. And this is definitely advice I didn't take, but I learned kind of the hard way, that the minding yourself part's quite important, not to disregard that.
Yeah, and I think as well, it's something that's been echoed through all the conversations pretty much of the show already is how important exercise, even during a busy schedule, is for someone with an ADHD brain to but just making sure that those things that do benefit you don't fall by the wayside. Isn't it?
Yeah, and the exercise one is massive. Like, and I can understand why that's come across on all your episodes, and because I definitely think that's the one thing I've been quite consistent with since my diagnosis is just sticking to exercising quite regularly. And now the type of exercise will change, but sticking to exercise, and it's definitely something that if I'm not doing it, I would notice it straight away. It's the knock-on effect it has if
Yeah.
you compromise on those things. It's massive.
Brilliant. Thank you for sharing all of that. I'm really curious, Emily, before we finish up this conversation, is what does the future look like for Emily Sinclair?
I think at the minute, basically, I'm particularly with the coaching, I'm really looking to an online space for particularly late diagnosed women because I sat back and I thought about, right, what support would I love to have had when I was going through the process of diagnosis, but then even after, because you definitely go through a really tough period of like grieving after a diagnosis. So I'm in the process of setting up a monthly kind of meetup thing. So once a month we meet and we learn a little bit about ADHD, and then second time in the month we meet and we just have like a journaling club. So it's kind of adopting that like holistic approach to coaching. And then obviously the PhD stuff has always gone on in the background and it's very, very busy. But I'm hoping to still be able to, even when I do finish the PhD and when I am working in kind of academia, touch wood, I definitely think the next part of my research is definitely going to be something around ADHD. And I don't know what it'll be, but I definitely think I'm quite passionate about it. So I'd like to do something around it.
That's amazing. I look forward to hearing more about your journey through your PhD and everything after that as well. And I think that's really, in terms of the monthly calls of creating that community, I think that's
Mm,
a really amazing thing to do as well because sharing experiences and especially with ADHD, so you don't feel alone. I think that's
mm.
really, really key to be able to talk to people in those scenarios. Hence why I set up this podcast because the whole reason was because I wanted to support people who just maybe just realize they had it or have just gone through a diagnosis and not know where to turn because it can be such a lonely place. So I think that's
Yeah.
amazing work you're doing, and I really look forward to seeing what's coming up. If somebody is looking for an ADHD coach and is interested in working with you or attending your workshops, where's the best place to find you?
Yeah, so as you said, Instagram's probably the best place to find me. So it's just at Busy Brains Coaching, and that's probably the best place to get me. And then if you find me on that, you'll get my link tree, which has every other platform that you can get me on. And obviously then my website is just busybrainscoaching.com. So yeah, that's probably the best. They're the best two places to catch me on.
Amazing. Appreciate that, Emily. And thank you
Mm.
so much for your time today. I've really enjoyed our conversation and look forward to
Thanks for
speaking to you
having
again
me.
soon.
Yeah, thank you.